Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We will get started very soon. We're just going to give it another minute or so and let some folks join. All right, I think it's time to get this started. Again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nick Kaza, and I work on energy and sustainability programs at the National League of Cities. Today, we're going to learn about solar and electrification policies and how they can be mutually beneficial. Joining us today are two great presenters. We have Carl Linville, Principal with the Regulatory Assistance Project, and we have Scott Blanc, who is a strategic business planner in building electrification and energy efficiency with the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Before we get started, just some general webinar basics. Everybody is on mute, and this webinar is being recorded. We will post it to the SolSmart YouTube page within a few days after we get done with the presentation. After our speakers have concluded, we will have time for a brief Q&A. So if you have any questions, please submit them through the question feature in your control panel. It may look a little bit different than what you have on the screen because this is for the organizer, but it should be a little thing that you can toggle for questions. If you don't want to use that, you can send them to kaza@nlc.org, KASZA@nlc.org. That will come to my inbox, and I will answer the questions then. As I had mentioned, this webinar is brought to you by the SolSmart program. For those of you that don't know, SolSmart is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, Solar Energy Technology Office. We have a goal to designate 300 communities across the country at either a gold, silver, or bronze level. And a big part of our program is to provide communities with technical assistance to help them achieve their desired designation level. So the National League of Cities, along with the Regulatory Assistance Project, are part of the SolSmart team that provides technical assistance. This is a quick look at some of our designated communities from across the country. We're currently at 239, so we're well on our way to our 300 goal, and hopefully we'll be able to surpass that goal significantly. As I had mentioned, the SolSmart program really provides assistance to help communities enhance their local solar markets, making it easier and more affordable for homes and businesses to install and access solar energy. Obviously, there's other benefits as well, promoting local jobs, helping communities achieve their climate and energy goals, while also improving internal processes to be more efficient and well-defined. And at the end of the day, for designated communities, we also have a great SolSmart plaque that you can hang up in City Hall, at a county facility, wherever you choose. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, Carl and Scott. Luckily enough, they're both in California, so they are in the same room together, which isn't always the case. So hopefully this will be a smooth transition. Scott, I am about to make you presenter right now.
Okay, 1 second, and launch. Okay, and I know I need to swap settings.
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear, by the way.
Okay, all right, I think.
Okay, does that look good, Nick?
Yep, looks good on my end.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Carl Linville. I'm with the Regulatory Assistance Project. we've been doing quite a bit of work lately on beneficial electrification. And so we're kind of excited to bring this to you to help you connect the dots between some of the things you might be working on in your cities on things like electric vehicle programs, along with your solar investment goals. So this webinar is really focused on how can you make these things work together. Deepen your solar investment by doing beneficial electrification that is complementary to the production of that solar. This is a little bit about the Regulatory Assistance Project, which I'm not going to read, but it'll be in the slide deck for you to look at. So what we're going to talk about today, first I'm going to talk about some barriers that emerge as your solar adoption deepens, some things that some of you might have experienced. I'm going to talk about how beneficial electrification can potentially help you pass these barriers. And then I'm going to present a couple of the case studies from a recent brief that RAP has written for SolSmart on this subject. A Minnesota co-op example and a Vermont Green Mountain Power example. Then I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and Scott has a presentation on SMUD's plan to achieve zero net carbon. He's going to talk a little bit about why beneficial electrification is helpful for that goal, or even necessary for that goal, and then talk about a few examples of what SMUD's doing now. So what are some problems that arise? Well, so let's think about the investor-owned utility for just a minute. By the way, I'm a former utility commissioner, and part of what RAP does is try to bring information about, regulation to folks that may be a little bit external to that process. So I'm going to talk just for a minute about some rate-making basics that may go against you as you're adopting solar. Regulation works on something called a cost of service approach, where total costs are recovered for services provided and with a reasonable return on investment. And regulators are concerned with evaluating that investments and that rates that are set are just and reasonable, sufficient but no more than necessary to recover costs. So these sound like worthwhile goals, but they can actually get in the way. And so the first barrier that you might run into is that utility profit is affected by DER adoption. Even if you have, beneficial rate-making policies like decoupling, there's this basic dynamic that increased sales increase utility profit in the traditional regulatory approach. And so anything that reduces sales, like adopting solar does, or energy efficiency programs, is going to have an effect on utility profit. This creates an incentive on the part of the utility to be reluctant to move forward with DG energy efficiency policies. So we try to think about how to reform regulation in a way where these goals can become more complementary. But as your solar adoption deepens, you may run into some reluctance on the part of utilities to support you in deepening your solar adoption. This is just an illustration of how rate making affects things. Energy efficiency means less need for capital expenditures. Distributed generation means less need for capital investment, and both of those things mean potentially less profit and revenue for the utility. So we have to overcome that. The second barrier that you may run into is distribution system impacts. When you have relatively low solar deployment, the impact on the distribution system, on your electric system reliability, is pretty negligible. As solar deployment gets higher and deepens, then your utility may tell you that they need to hold back on approving more solar installations because things like power quality, reliability, and safety are at risk on the local distribution system. There are things that you can do, fortunately, to offset these impacts, including things like moving from dumb inverters to smart inverters, making strategic investments on the grid that address the problems that arise as you get more solar adoption in specific places, well-placed storage, and beneficial electrification can do the trick too. And so that's our focus today, is we're going to talk about how beneficial electrification can address both of these barriers. It can address the barrier of affecting operation on the distribution system, in other words, preventing problems even while more solar grows. And we're also going to talk about, or at least I'm going to talk about more, how the adoption of beneficial electrification creates an opportunity for the utility, an investment opportunity for the utility that can help to offset some of the lost revenues that come when you just have solar installations happening by themselves and on their own. So first of all, when we say beneficial electrification, what do we mean by beneficial electrification? This is a diagram of a smart house. The mothership for WRAP is located in Vermont, so everybody has a basement. So you'll notice this one has a basement. I don't know if you have basements where you are, but we're just going to walk through a few things that can happen to residences that move the house towards beneficial electrification. First of all, there's installation of solar PV. There's the opportunity to move to high efficiency heat pumps with air exchangers for your heating needs. There's the opportunity to adopt a grid integrated heat pump water heater, which is electric, which can be beneficially dispatched to use electricity when it's abundant and to hold back from using electricity when it's scarce. And then, of course, there's smart charging of electric vehicles. So all of these together combine to turn the residence or the business, this is a residential example, but can turn any building into a resource asset that helps to keep the load balanced on the system. In other words, to help protect reliability and safety, to make the overall contribution of the house to the grid positive, and actually to create some business opportunity for the utility by placing more dependence on electricity. So WRAP coined this term beneficial electrification with a specific definition in mind. When we think about going forward with beneficial electrification, we think, well, it could be beneficial if it saves customers money, if it reduces environmental impacts, and if it enables better grid management. Now, all three are not necessarily all positive for every beneficial electrification adoption. So the criteria that we suggest is that at least one is distinctly positive, a very positive impact, without the other two being negative. There could be examples where all three are positive, but we're trying to avoid harming any of the three. And if we say that if an electrification step achieves that criteria, then we would say that that's beneficial. It's benefiting the system without causing an undue harm. So why is it that beneficial electrification can help the grid? Well, I described it briefly before with the water heater, and here's another illustration. So your solar panels, you see in this little graphic, you see a picture of solar panels with the first green bump. That's when solar is producing, right? So you've got plentiful electricity coming into the grid at that time. When the sun goes down, you may resort to some other resources to provide your need. And you may also have wind on your system that's also providing resource. If you don't control your water heater, if you have a water heater that is using electricity but it's not controlled, then what you're going to end up having happen is you're going to most likely charge that or use electricity when it's not abundant and available. If, on the other hand, you can use that electricity when it's abundant to charge your water heater, then you're benefiting the grid. You're using electricity when it's abundant. You're benefiting yourself because it's probably very inexpensive at that time, and you're also using abundant low carbon resources, so you're benefiting the environment. So in that case, it's a win-win-win. So the reason that beneficial electrification is helpful is, we have this situation of the duck curve, which would be familiar to some of you and maybe not all of you. It's more of a California phenomenon, but occurring other places as well. We have this situation where you have a lot of generation in the middle of the day. You'd like to figure out ways to use that, and you have too much. So if you have beneficial electrification, if you can draw some of that electricity into beneficial use, like with water heaters or with electric vehicle charging, then you're helping to mitigate this problem that happens when there's too much solar on the system. And the other aspect of that you would like to do is, the other problem is the head of the duct. You see how high the duct is, and you see the ramp challenge that happens from the afternoon, say from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. There's a steep ramp there, which presents an operational challenge for the utility. So if you can simultaneously fill in that belly of the duct, raise it by using electricity beneficially, and at the same time shifting use away from that head of the duct, bringing it down, then you're mitigating that ramp, that steep increase in electricity generation that's needed. And you're really performing a very valuable service for the grid. If you do not invest in beneficial electrification, then what would happen? Well, then the utility would need to potentially curtail low carbon renewables. The utility would potentially have to make investments in the system that you end up finding their way to your bill. If you beneficially electrify, then you can help to solve that problem, avoid those investments, and avoid this out of balance problem. Another key tool or complementary tool in making beneficial electrification work is to design your electricity rates so that you draw people and yourselves to use electricity when it's abundant and shift away from times when it's not abundant. So RAP is in favor of things like time of use rates, and we have a little manual to describe how that can work that's illustrated there on the right. So in our little beneficial electrification brief, we provided a few case studies. One of them is on SMUD, who you're going to hear from in a moment, so I'm not going to go through that one. But I'm going to go through two others. This first one is called the Sunna Project. Was built by, or is operated by the Steel Wasaka Cooperative in Owatonna, Minnesota. They built a community solar garden at their headquarters. They allowed customers to buy pieces of that solar garden, so basically to benefit from some of the electricity built from that solar garden. But the interesting and innovative thing that they did was that they combined the construction of their solar garden with an incentive to install controllable electric water heating. So how'd that work? You could buy a piece of the system, pay $1,225 for a panel, or you could buy your first panel for only $170 if you accepted a free water heater that could be grid integrated, and if you subscribe to the utility program that would use your grid integrated water heater. So what does that mean? Well, that means that from your perspective as a customer, you don't see any difference You have warm water for your shower when you need warm water and all of that. But the utility, by choosing when that water heater is recharged, is able to shape the load towards the time when there's abundant electricity and away from the time when there's stress, and serve this beneficial electrification function. So here's a win-win that combined building a new solar project, significantly increasing the amount of solar on a system, and achieved that partly, controlled the potential integration impacts of that increased solar by deploying grid-integrated water heaters. A second example I'm going to present is from Green Mountain Power in Vermont. Green Mountain Power implemented something called the eHome Initiative. It offers the opportunity for a comprehensive home energy makeover. They offer the opportunity for you to have professional analysts visit you, assess your home, work through where electrification could be beneficial to your home, as well as assessing your home for energy efficiency improvements. And then they have incentive programs to help you install solar, cold climate heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and some other devices. So again, all of these devices are going to be controllable. So the home is going to produce solar when the sun's shining, but its loads can be shaped to use that solar beneficially and to integrate with how the system is operating beneficially. So both of these examples, there's a link there. You can follow up and see what these two innovative utilities have done. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to another utility. Oh, before I hand it off to Scott, I'll just say that RAP does have a series of recent publications within the last 6 months on this topic of beneficial electrification, and you'll find a link to those resources in your in the slide deck. So Scott, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Thank you. Let me switch presentations. Okay, is the display looking okay, Nick?
Yep, good to go.
All right, thank you. Hello, I'm Scott Blanc. I'm from SMUD. That's the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. That is in California, and a little bit about SMUD coming up. I do, since there are two people from California here, and I know this is a call around the country, I just wanted to say I did grow up in Indiana, so I am used to snow, and I go back there frequently, although usually in the summertime. But so I do have a little larger perspective than just California. So SMUD is California's 5th largest utility, although the largest utility is about 10 times our size. We're the 5th largest utilities. We are in kind of the center of the state, just east of San Francisco, about 60 miles east of San Francisco. And our district covers virtually all of Sacramento County, which includes the city of Sacramento and then other neighborhoods around Sacramento. We are an electric-only utility with a population of 1.5 million, 2,000 employees, 2,200 employees, and about 50% of all of our electricity is carbon-free, and about 25% of that is from renewables, 25% of that is from hydroelectric. 600,000 accounts, and then our load is on there as well, just for reference. So I've only been here a year and a half, but when we got here, we were working on an electrification program. So electrification really means taking gas end uses and converting them to electric end uses. And I specifically work on buildings, not on vehicles. Although I did used to work at Ford in Michigan, but I've since changed my career to just be focused on buildings. But when I started, as I started, we had a very small electrification program that we got funded, and shortly after that, we started doing our integrated resource plan, or our IRP, which is a long-term strategic analysis of plausible future scenarios. So what the IRP helps the organization do is just set priorities around greenhouse gas reductions, costs and rates, and reliability. And several scenarios are modeled, and then we go in front of the board. We are not an investor-owned utility. We are a community utility. And then the IRP is updated periodically. So the 2018 IRP Focus we ended up being very specific in trying to keep our IRP regional to the extent we could, and really focused on carbon reductions. And so the key areas of that are energy efficiency, electrification of both vehicles and buildings, low carbon energy being added to the grid, and mitigating of other greenhouse gas sources where we could. So our IRP approved the goals that you see on the screen. So our 2020 emissions are estimated to be about 3.2 million metric tons. So in 10 years, by 2030, we should be at 1.3 million metric tons. And by 2040, we will be at net zero. And then we'll be at the idea is to be at net zero throughout from that point forward. And net zero is not zero. We determined that the cheapest way to achieve this is a community-wide, it's a SMUD-specific net zero using the community to help negate our greenhouse gases that we use. Our plan is still going to use some natural gas facilities to create electricity. We have some of the more energy efficient and productive and cheaper gas plants on the grid in California, so we recognize that they will be some of the last to go down the road. And so we wanted to keep those in order to keep our rates low and be able to supply that relatively clean gas-powered electricity back on the grid. So getting to an absolute zero would cost about double what getting to a net zero would be. So we went with the net zero option. And this is a pretty busy slide, but just showing some points in time of where we're at and what we plan to achieve. So 2020 is just kind of right around the corner, right? So we should be at about a third renewables. We've already begun installing, we've already begun doing electrification packages, and that is electric heat pump space heating, heat pump water heating, induction cooking, and electric clothes drying. The two by far the largest contributors are going to be space heating and water heating. Those two together make up 80 to 90% of all the emissions in a building. So those are the most critical to achieve. So what else are we doing here? So doubling EE savings, and there's an asterisk on that. That's a state goal for us to double our energy efficiency savings over what was previously planned by 2030. One of the things we're working on at SMUD is to go away from a saving kilowatts and kilowatt hours, and we're converting all of our energy efficiency programs and electrification into a carbon metric. So we should be realigning our portfolios around saving carbon, and then we plan to double the carbon savings. I think it will be much more in line with the goals, the goals of the state that aren't necessarily expressed directly because that metric to shift kilowatt hours to carbon has really not been done yet. And I think we're a few weeks away from having that metric and being able to go back in front of the board and shift that metric to a carbon based. Anyway, what we're also showing here is that by 2030, over 50% of our sales should be of heat pump sales of water heating and space heating should be, new sales should be heat pumps, and by 2040, 100%. And what that will do to SMUD's grid, and this was again from the IRP presentation. So the board approved a $1.7 billion addition, just DER budget additions, strictly for energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and building electrification. And that $1.7 billion is going to be spread out over 21 years. We expect that to be about $50 million, on average, about $50 million incremental to building electrification per year. Currently, that's about double the size of our traditional EE programs. So we should be about 3 times, if you combine EE and EB, our budget growth. And the rate impact, I don't have it on here, but the rate impact to our customers by 2040, I think we assumed it would raise the rates of our customers by about $80 per month. That should raise the combined gas and electric rates of our customers by about $80 per month. However, that does not include the savings from natural gas, and it does not include the savings from gasoline in their vehicles. So we expect it to be net positive for our customers. And I know Carl talked about beneficial electrification. At SMUD, we don't talk about it in terms of beneficial electrification. We talk about it in terms of electrification of buildings, so EB versus BE. And we do that for a number of reasons. Because at SMUD, all electrification is beneficial, and for many different ways. In this next slide, I'll kind of talk to some of those benefits. But we have really some of the ideal climate at least in California, to electrify buildings. Our winter lows are in the upper 20s, lower 30s. So you don't necessarily need cold climate heat pumps. And we have more heating demand than cooling demand, even in Sacramento. And so customers are going to save money. We think it's good for the grid, and it's just beneficial to SMUD and our customers at the same time. The other reason we like EB is because we want to talk about it in terms of similar to how you talk about an electric vehicle. So just EB versus EV, and zero emission buildings is really where we're going with this. So benefits of building electrification. Okay. So we're going to see reduced our customers' total energy bills will go down. So that's the combined natural gas and so just talking about buildings here. So the combined natural gas and electricity bills of our customers should go down. Depending on the vintage of the home, it's going to range between about $500 a year and about $100 a year. And on average, in an older, and replacing a tank gas water heater with a heat pump water heater should save around $100 a year. The technologies that will increase bills are going to be cooking, induction cooking, and clothes drying. But those bill increases are more than offset by the bill decreases that will be found through space heating and water heating. So it's good for our customers. It's good for our community. We're going to be creating a lot of local jobs. These are jobs that really can't be outsourced. As you electrify a building, you're going to employ a lot of the workforce, the contractors, the HVAC contractors primarily, but there will be others involved. And those are just good jobs for our economy. It has been a little challenging getting contractors on board. When I moved to California, shortly after I moved to California, I was a general contractor. I suppose I still am a general contractor. But what we're seeing, and it's probably no surprise to most people, is that the contractors have not fully bought into heat pumps yet. They've had years of experience of poor performing heat pumps, and they are more temperamental for installation. So I think a little more care needs to be taken. And so fear of warranty callbacks are really an issue with our contractors. What we also expect building electrification to do is to improve regional air quality. Every time you take out a gas appliance in somebody's home, you're reducing one pollution source that's local to the community. Now, of course, 50% of our electricity is produced by a greenhouse gas. Let's just say gas at this point. Moving forward, the board also committed to any load growth above what we have in 2018 will be produced by renewable resource. So as we electrify buildings, we will not be building any more gas plants. All increases will be a renewable resource, a clean air resource. We'll also improve indoor air quality. This is something that I know we've all been told about natural gas and that it's clean and reliable and cheap, and some of those may be true, but there's nothing cleaner than cooking on electricity. And I know electricity is or cooking anyway, is one of the more emotional appliances that you could potentially even talk to somebody about electrifying. But getting rid of the gas cooking in somebody's home is going to directly improve the health of the occupants of the home. A recent study said 13% of all childhood asthma cases are related to gas cooking in the home. I can give you that resource if you're interested. But so there's a direct improvement in the health of the people in the homes by electrifying. And if you've never tried induction cooking, it is a very good substitute for gas. When people tell me they love gas cooking, I push back and say, no, you love the performance that gas gives you over electric resistance. And I try to give them one of the induction hot plates that's in my trunk for them to try, because it's really a similar and sometimes better cooking experience than gas, and I think you can win over a lot of people once they try. And I think really that's the gateway to electrifying the whole building, even though there's very little carbon savings there. I think electrification also is just future prepping of buildings. I think that, and this can be done so a new construction, what we always work, when we work with the cities and counties, the first thing I want to ask is that they mandate that all new construction be all electric ready, so that we're not taking away anyone's choice today. But we are getting the building, kind of future prepping the building for choices down the road. And that doesn't, if you run a 240 circuit to all of the natural gas end uses, it's a fairly small marginal cost to new construction, and it's going to save a lot of money down the road. So I think that's an easy first step. And then if that's there, then gas is always the optional commodity in the building, because most buildings can run solely on electricity. And then what this is also doing for SMUD is this will create a downward pressure on electric rates. Our rates are going to go up as we aim to electrify over 300,000 homes in the next 20 years. So rates will go up a small amount in SMUD, but it kind of pays for itself, and long term it does create downward pressure on our rates. And then there's just less emissions. There's just less emissions from these buildings being polluted. Electrifying one existing residential building is the equivalent of removing one gasoline car off the grid, or gasoline car, or the equivalent, one EV is worth about the same as one house. So it's a lot of carbon that we're saving. And in our collaboration with our local agencies, what we're really trying to do with local governments, kind of like I talked about, all new construction should be electric ready, is an easy first step. And if you don't want to go that far, even going to one appliance would be nice. Like the California Energy Code going into effect in 2020 mandates that every water heater has to be all electric ready, so that you have to also wire in a 240 circuit for the water heater, even if you go with gas. So our energy code already went there for water heating, but I think local governments can do that for the whole building. I think that's a great first step. And then been talking to a lot, really anyone who will listen about permit compliance, building permit compliance, because I think at some point down the road, and maybe that's 10, 20, 40 years, whatever that is for each jurisdiction, permit compliance is so key to electrifying buildings down the road, because if people aren't pulling permits on their building, then the local jurisdiction really has no idea what's going on in the market. So I think permit compliance is a great way to improve energy efficiency of existing buildings, and also get ready for maybe a possible future mandate of any time on a natural replacement that it has to go back to electricity, which is certainly something that we're talking about in California. And then for the California Energy Commission, what we're really trying to do, and I messed up these dates a little bit, so excuse me for that, but we're now incenting a lot of different electrification programs, which will be on the next slide. And our goal, our real hope, is that the 2025 code all new construction will be only allowed to be all electric. So this says 2022. 2025 is really what our goal is. I just fat fingered it, I guess. And then 3 years after that, so the 2028 code would then go for retrofit code. So kind of that goes back to the permit compliance and why it's so important. And this is pretty much my last slide. And so these are the programs that we have in operation right now. All of these programs I've calculated the sum of all of these programs and what we're running for the next 20 years has a positive net present value to SMUD, which means we make money on giving away this much money or in incentives, that it will come back to benefit SMUD and its rate and our customers long term. Usually at these values right now, it's really the one useful life of the equipment is. So essentially, we think there's $5,000 of value of a new home over 13 years. And after that, it helps to bring down the cost or improve the net present value. So these are certainly some of the largest incentives I've seen out there. So $5,000 new construction, single family existing is $10,500. I know of several, so that what I've seen in the field is we've done, so people are replacing their water heating, space heating, and cooking, and are out of pocket less than $5,000 when they do this using our incentives. So it's a really great program right now, and of course, our goal is to bring these incentives down as quickly as we can. But it's really about creating incentives at a level that energizes our contractors, that makes them realize they can make more money when they figure out heat pumps and know how to install them. And that's really what we're seeing now. The contractors are galvanizing around these and are hiring the right. So we've had, for example, plumbing contractors that have now brought on licensed electrical contractors into their company so that they can do the heat pump water heater conversion all in-house instead of subbing out to two trades. So things like that are happening in our marketplace pretty quickly, and we're seeing really good uptake. And really that's it. That's what I have for now. So Nick, would you want to take back control and maybe some questions?
Absolutely. Actually, if you want to go back to that previous slide, we just had a question come in about the incentives for multifamily being lower than single family. What was the reasoning behind that?
All of these are calculated based on actual savings. What we anticipate there's three components to all of these incentives. There's new sales, which is usually about 20% of these, kind of on average, the new sales value to SMUD. And then there's the energy efficiency value. We've calculated for 2019, one therm of gas, we can equate to about 20 kilowatt hours. So we can claim 20 kilowatt hours of energy efficiency every time we remove a therm of gas. So there's some energy efficiency value there. And then the third component is there's a retained value. So if we didn't do energy efficiency via way of natural gas and claiming one therm as 20 kilowatt hours, then we would have had to do more electrical efficiency, which would have reduced our sales long term. So we can claim that as value too. So that's how those incentives are calculated. And so why is multifamily lower? It's just because there's less value. There's less there's less energy use in multifamily per unit than there is in single family, and less energy consumption.
So let me just ask you, what's the definition of multifamily? Is this a unit within a multifamily complex?
Yeah, this is per unit in a multifamily complex. Yeah, so new construction is $1,750 per unit.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Actually, we're going to stick on this same slide. And what is the HPWH direct install program? Are contractors installing heat pump water heaters on gas homes?
That's right. So we've kind of changed it. It's a heat pump water heater. It's now a turnkey program. So that's coming pretty soon to SMUD, to where our customers can call in. They want a new water heater, and they call in, and we dispatch a contractor that's under contract with SMUD. They will roll out with a water heater on the truck and be able to do ideally same day change out. So this is water heater burns out, we can get them going same day with a heat pump water heater. Ideally, it's probably going to be a 2-day turnaround to start with, but that's the goal right now.
Okay, thank you. Sticking with you, Scott, a question about kind of the definition of net zero. Just could you kind of reiterate how SMUD defines that? And then I guess kind of along those same lines, what type of emissions reductions are you looking at over the next 10 years? Has that kind of been modeled out yet, or is it still kind of in the early stages?
Yeah, so first I'll talk about, I guess, the netting. So yeah, you can switch back to that slide I was going to. So the netting piece of this is that really we're looking at emissions from a SMUD perspective, not a community perspective. And because we want to keep some gas on our grid, because it's going to be better for our reliability, it's going to be cheaper for our customers to keep our gas on the grid. Because we're keeping that, because we're keeping that gas on the grid, we think that by 2030, we're going to be at 1.3 million metric tons, and that's still net. And then we're going from there to a net zero. And I think from 2030 to 2040, at 2040, I believe we're supposed to be at 1 million metric tons. So that 1 million metric tons will be offset. So again, that's a SMUD-specific carbon allowance is going to be 1 million metric tons in 2040. And the netting of that is going to come from electric vehicles and building electrification. So we hope to get 1 million metric tons of carbon savings by electrifying buildings and electric vehicles that will, and that's above what we had planned prior to the IRP. So that's why the $1.7 billion investment, so that we can get more electric vehicles and more buildings than we had planned prior to the IRP.
Okay, great. I think I'm going to take back control here since we are a little close to wrapping up. Kind of a next question, just broadly speaking, are we going to see electrification roll out in certain climate zones and geographic areas first? And is it going to be more likely to be in certain places over others just based on, cold climate extremes or even heating extremes that we may see?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I hope we're going to see it in California statewide. That's where it's going to be led. But yeah, there are, like anything, there are going to be situations where gas is just going to be better. We don't expect to replace every bit of gas everywhere, and a lot of that's going to be industrial, but also some cold climates may be later to electrify. So we just are almost very close to completion of a statewide or a nearly statewide study. It shows it really is advantageous all over California in many climate zones, but we didn't do all of the climate zones. So yeah, we're going to focus on. There's a lot of different reasons, I suppose, to electrify, and SMUD has made their own reason and their own goal through their IRP. The city of Sacramento also has a 2045 net zero goal, so that's a citywide goal. But many different jurisdictions are also setting their own goals, and those are really the leaders before there's a statewide mandate. So yes, some situations just work better.
So if I could just throw in a couple more things. So those publications that I showed at the end of my presentation on electrification include in them the how cost effective it is to electrify depending on what fuel you're currently using. So places in the Northeast, for example, that are still using heating oil, or rural places that are using propane, it can be very cost effective to electrify very quickly. Actually, the climate also matters, but I would just refer the audience to those electrification publications on the specific technologies, the transportation, space heating, and water heating. And in there, we lay out how cost effective, what the payback period is for electrifying depending on what fuel you're in, what your climate is, and things like that. And I just want to reinforce Scott's point that what cities do is incredibly important. I mean, Scott just emphasized turning the contractors around, which is just a huge deal, right? Well, where is that going to happen? It's not going to happen at a statewide level or region. It's going to start with cities and their compliance programs and so forth. So what you all do is really important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Carl. And I'm actually glad that Scott, mentioned kind of what some of the local jurisdictions are doing in the state when it comes to looking at kind of basically electrification within their code and their ordinances. Realizing that not all local governments are in California, where it sounds like they're really moving towards a state level mandate. How important is it, and are you seeing examples even right now in California of cities and counties that are kind of getting ahead of the state level mandate and actually integrating this into their codes right now?
Well, I know I saw today the city of Berkeley just introduced something going before their city council to require all new construction buildings to be all electric. It's probably not a whole lot of new construction in Berkeley, but they did just introduce that. So that's one of the first I've seen. I know Arcata is working on a plan to not only electrify new construction but existing buildings, and we've been working with our local gas utility also to kind of talk about how to, the term is called pruning the tree, but how to systematically work with our gas company in a way that minimizes or maximizes stranded assets. So I guess minimizes stranded assets. So knowing if a gas company has a major maintenance issue that they're going to have to spend millions of dollars on in, say, 2021, maybe that's an area where we can step in and electrify so the gas infrastructure just doesn't get updated in that. So a lot of different ways, a lot of different things going on right now. Carl?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. No, I think that was a perfect little summary, and realizing that we're almost at 3 p.m. here on the East Coast, I think it's time for us to wrap up today's webinar. Gentlemen, Carl, Scott, I'd like to thank you both for your presentations. I think it was fantastic content. For those that are viewing, we will make sure that the slides are shared, and that this webinar is also going to be, as I said, posted on the SolSmart YouTube page. And keep an eye out on your emails. We will hopefully be announcing very soon our next webinar, which should be sometime in early April, about community solar and how local governments can take advantage of community solar programs. So with that, thank you all again for attending. Thank you to our presenters, and have a good day.
Bye.
Thanks.